So much for listening to this episode of Earrings Off. We want to invite you to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. You can find us on Facebook at Earrings Off Podcast and on Instagram at The Earrings Off Podcast.
Welcome to Earrings Off. I'm Lou.
And I'm Teresa. Let's get started.
Welcome to another episode of the Earrings Off podcast. Today we have the pleasure of introducing Janet Sherlund, a remarkable individual whose life story is both heart-wrenching and inspiring. Janet dedicated her life to raising her family and serving on nonprofit boards in education, health, and the cultural arts. However, her journey truly began with a profound life event, being given up for adoption at birth. This experience left her feeling as though she was living a borrowed life, affecting her sense of trust and self-worth. In her memoir, Abandoned at Birth, Janet delves into her lifelong quest to find her biological mother, hoping to finally feel a sense of belonging and connection. Her book is more than just a personal achievement. It raises awareness about the complexity of adoption, loss, and grief, highlighting that it takes more than love to heal from such trauma. Janet's resilience and dedication to her cause are truly commendable. A graduate of Colgate University, she now lives on the beautiful island of Nantucket with her husband of 45 years. Join us as we dive into Janet's compelling story and explore the themes of identity, family, and self-discovery. This is an episode you won't want to miss. Enjoy. Well, hello and welcome. Today we have with us Janet Sherlund. Janet, welcome to Earrings Off.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to our conversation.
Yes, me too. So we're going to jump right in. Can you share more about your personal journey that inspired Abandoned at Birth? What motivated you to write this memoir?
I spent my whole life, I was adopted at birth and spent my life growing up in a family where there were 4 children. We were all adopted. And so none of us shared blood. None of us really belonged sort of cellularly to each other. And growing up, I had so many friends say, oh, I don't look like my parents, or, I don't have the same interests. That's not important. And I thought, well, it's only not important because you have that. But if you don't know who you are or where you came from or what your heritage is, and you don't see anyone who's mirroring you or sort of understands you on this just sort of fundamental level. And if you have this hole in you that I felt, this big black hole, I felt something was missing. I'd been abandoned at birth. I had that rupture from my mother and no reunion with her, and I just felt alone and lost and untethered. And I wanted to write a book that would try and explain the feelings of being adopted, not just the saga of it or the story of it, but what it really feels like to be raised as an adopted person and live a borrowed life. As nice as that life might be, it's not authentic. And when you're living in that, you feel that every day. You feel the falseness of your life and the sort of unreality and otherness of who you are, even if you're having a perfectly lovely adoptive experience. And so I wrote the book to try and communicate that, to affirm to other adoptees, but also help non-adoptees understand why the issues that are being talked about, adoptee rights in the 40 states with closed records, sealed records still, or trying to understand some of the other issues of a number, even donor-conceived individuals these days. I think it's really important to understand that. And I was hoping that by writing this book and sharing the feelings of it, that emotional experience would help open hearts and minds to the broader conversation.
So, Janet, how do closed adoptions, especially prevalent in the 20th century, contribute to the sense of detachment and longing experienced by adoptees? How did it shape your own experience? You just referenced that a bit earlier in your response. So, can you expand on that a bit?
Yes, I'd be happy to. The 50s and the 60s and the 70s had primarily sealed or closed adoptions in the United States. And so there are a lot of us out there for whom we had no information about our heritage, our authentic identity, or our origin story. And there's something called genealogical bewilderment. And they've identified that as when you don't know anything about yourself, when you're not living in an environment of others who share your biological and emotional heritage, that it's very difficult to put yourself together, to find a sense of self, to have that core. You feel other, you feel lost, you feel totally disconnected from everyone else in the world. You've never seen anyone who is like you. If I try to say to people, can you imagine yourself if you'd never seen your mother's face?
Yeah.
Can you imagine yourself? How would you know yourself if you were handed to strangers and told to live with them for the rest of your life? Even if they were kind to you, you would still feel different and odd. They're not quite fitting in here and I don't know why. Or the feelings that you have, even with your closest friends who may love you and you feel great with and share so much with, is not the same as the way you feel deep inside when you're with family, blood family. So those are all things that we don't really identify, we don't talk about. But if you don't have that, if you miss that, growing up, you just have this big black hole in you and you feel just so lost. And I think I had chronic anxiety. I know I had chronic anxiety from this trauma. And everyone deals with trauma differently. There were four of us in my family. We're all adopted. Some of my siblings turned to drugs or alcohol. Some lived in denial. My reaction to this chronic trauma was massive panic attacks. And
Mm.
when I was young, like 11 or 12, I started having, mind-bending panic attacks.
Whoa. Yeah.
And I think it was at that time where all my peers and stuff were really starting to break away from their parents and become more independent and form a sense of self. And I was so dependent on my parents. I'm the only family I knew. I had this sense of being abandoned and rejected. And I was so dependent on my adoptive parents and family. And I couldn't break free of that. And any kind of newness or unfamiliar situation just gave me tremendous panic attacks. And so it took away choice in my life. I was no longer choosing things because I did or didn't want to do them. I was choosing anything that would keep me from having a panic attack. So this chronic anxiety, which sort of wore me down and in me expressed itself as panic for over a decade of my life. And for my other siblings, they dealt with it in other ways. But I think for all of us that live with this unknown sense of self and this primal this primal feeling of rejection and hurt and abandonment and this grief and loss that you don't understand. You're feeling it, but no one's talking about it. No one's telling you it's normal to feel that way. So you think something's wrong with me.
Right.
And I've learned that two things can be true at once. I can be grateful for having a fine adoption and have been traumatized for being
Yeah.
adopted.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
it's and so many people don't understand that. And in the adoption constellation, many of us talk about the fact that adoption is probably the only trauma in our culture that the victims are expected to be grateful for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. When you were talking, I was thinking about that, that people just sort of expect you to be thankful that you
And they
landed well, that you were adopted. Yeah,
and they measure the success of adoption by, you know, if you have a two-parent home and money and external
yeah,
measures.
yeah,
They're not looking inside. And so many of us who are adopted aren't free to express what we're really feeling. We
yeah,
are so grateful that
yeah.
you don't ever want to hurt your adoptive parents. And so you deny that you want to search or you deny that you're
Right.
really
Yeah,
sad.
Yeah.
And I didn't write my book until both of my adoptive parents had passed away.
Wow.
I just didn't feel free, to be honest, about the
Mhm.
experience. So it's we have to look underneath, and no matter what and most people who know me would think of me as a successful person. I've achieved a lot, I've been educated, I've led a very
Mhm.
comfortable life, having no idea of what was going on underneath and inside
Right.
and the battle I was fighting.
Mhm.
And
Wow.
they're surprised to learn the very high suicide rate amongst
Yeah.
adoptees.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Um,
never knew that.
yeah, it's at least 4 times the normal population, and that is based on a measure of survey of adopted parents. When
Mhm.
you talk directly to the adoptees, some are saying it's 32 times that, or that
Wow.
adoptees are 400 more times likely to commit suicide. So there's that high incidence of hospitalization for mental health and addiction. I mean, this is a trauma that we need to talk about because when these days donor conceived individuals are saying they need to know more about their father and who their father is,
Right.
what it looks like, and people are saying that's not important, but it is.
Yeah.
There is so much about identity and belonging that is biological, and
Well, yeah.
you know, reproductive rights, all sorts of things. You have to know that just being born and handed to strangers to be raised and asked to live a different sort of pretend false life isn't necessarily a good experience for the person being asked to live that lie.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I tell you, when you were speaking, Janet, in graduate school, I knew a student who actually gave her child up that was adopted. But years later, when her daughter, when they reunited, when I tell you the resemblance was so strong.
yeah,
I mean, I used to say you could go into a store anywhere and everybody would know that's your child.
yeah.
So when you talk about people saying, well, I don't look like my family, or, that when you were talking about that, that struck me because I remember when I saw pictures of them later, I was like, oh my Lord, that's
Yeah.
her. Because it was just that strong.
It is
Yeah.
striking. And when I finally in my 50s met my biological father and then in my 60s my biological mother, I was floored, gobsmacked with how much I was them and then how much my children inherited things from them. But um, it's when you watch shows like I think it's off the air now, but they run repeats. Long Lost Family is a show on TV. And when you see every episode, I remember watching it one night and just binging a lot of episodes. And in every episode, when they reunite the adoptee with the birth
Mhm.
family, you go, yeah, that's where they belong. They look like those people. They look like a sibling or an aunt or uncle or
They,
they
they
that's
look
where
like
they
them.
belong.
They look like them. They have mannerisms like
Yeah.
them. Sometimes they tilt their head like them. It's
Yeah. Sense
amazing
of
stuff.
humor, taste, the things
Yes.
that I have found come through the DNA, given
Yeah.
my experience, shock me. I mean,
Yeah.
crazy little habits and intuitions. And it's just, when I looked into my birth father's eyes, and this is a man who met me when he was 75, who didn't know he had fathered me, who
Mhm.
had, got a call one night
Yeah.
from the adoption agency saying, you have a daughter and she wants to meet you. Um, so I didn't know two things about him. We were just meeting for the first time. When I looked into his eyes, that big black hole in me filled up, and I immediately made sense. And I
Oh,
couldn't tell,
wow.
it wasn't based on facts or experience. It was like something cellular. It was just,
Wow.
this is my
Yeah.
people. This is my clan. This is why I look like I do. This is why I have my eyes and my little nose and why I have these arms and this body. I mean, this is where I come from. And I was in my 50s before I had that moment.
Mhm.
And I
Wow.
never made sense before that. It was just extraordinary. So that
Okay.
that biological connection, and it's whether you want it or not, and whether it's good or bad. When I met my biological mother 5 years later, because she kept denying me for many years, it wasn't a happy reunion, and she didn't want me in her life. But I'm so much like her. I look so much like her and behave so much like her, and it was a good cautionary tale because there are things that I saw rampant in her that I saw a little bit in me and I could deny. But when I saw them rampant in her, I went, whoa, don't
Mm.
let that take over.
Yeah.
when you have to know the good and the bad. And when you're born into a family, you don't get to say, I only want a family with no problems, because let's face it, that doesn't
That's
exist.
right. No, it
And so
does not.
adoptees, we're not weak. We can handle the truth, and we need to know what's in our family, the good and the bad. And we need
Mhm.
to, we need to feel the joy, but also the pain. And we need to help understand who we truly are, all of us,
Yeah.
because we can't form ourselves until we have all that information, and we can
Wow.
accept it or reject it, but we have it to work with. And
Hmm. Hmm.
so
Okay.
critical.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, I feel like we could literally end this conversation right now. What an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing that you eventually in your life met with your parents. That's quite incredible. But we're not done. And we have a few more questions. So can you share insights into how this separation affected your life and the lives of others you encountered in your journey?
And I think the chronic feelings, there are seven key issues that uh, all adoptees deal with, and they're issues of separation and loss, trust, rejection, guilt and shame, identity, intimacy, loyalty, mastery, power, and control. These are all issues in life that we all struggle with. And so you have so much to overcome when you have this primal separation at birth from, in the utero, we are one with this woman. We are tasting her and hearing her voice and her heartbeat. When you're suddenly separated at birth, it's important to be reunited, for babies to be held and loved. And when you don't get that, you're taken away and separated. That's such a primal wound, to quote Nancy Newton Verrier. And it really determines so much about the rest of your life.
Hmm.
And I think the way to counteract that is to understand it and talk about it and
Mhm.
learn about it, and know that it's normal to have these feelings given that situation, and that
Mhm.
with help and guidance and support,
Mhm.
that you can work through that.
I have a follow-up question. Have you come across any research about adoptees who haven't been successful in finding their parents, right? Or
Yeah,
connecting with
yeah,
someone.
yeah.
So they themselves being the only person, right?
Mhm.
Have you met and talked to someone who whose life fits that scenario?
I think there are sadly a lot of people whose life fits that scenario, and I've certainly met a lot and spoken with a lot. And when you're searching and can't find that person, it's heartbreaking, and it leaves you with a grief that's almost unmanageable. And
Hmm.
others may not want to search. There are people who don't want to face it, or want to numb it, or want to deny it. And maybe sometimes they wait until a different point in life, when a crisis comes up, or something happens. I had one woman speak to me who said her mother had been adopted and never searched, and on her deathbed said to her daughter, I am so sad I never did that. And you please take up the search now, and you find our family. So there are people that, like I said, we all deal with trauma differently. And whether you're compelled to look at it and try to fix it by learning about it and tackling it, or whether you just turn away, as we each respond to things like this differently. But when I when adoptees want to find the answers and can't, because their records are sealed and they don't have an avenue in, it is it is a lifelong heartbreak and a lifelong emptiness. It is a true trauma and grief for them. It breaks my heart.
Mm,
Mhm. Mhm.
thank you.
Okay. Janet, your search began with a false narrative provided by the adoption agency. So, how did these false details impact your journey? And what advice would you give to others navigating similar situations?
Right. First of all, my advice is listen to yourself and never stop searching and looking to the next resource or the next idea, the next thing. The false narrative shaped my perception of who I was looking for, maybe where I was looking, and it didn't. I don't know, it never rang true. Anyway, the letter I had received when I first wrote and asking about non-identifying information was so scrubbed. It was just so, oh, everything's fine. Everyone was happy. You don't need to know anymore. Everyone's healthy. It was very dismissive. And that hurt too. And when I finally learned the truth and saw my records and met my birth parents, I'm sorry I, as a younger person, didn't trust my gut. I think for anyone facing something difficult, trust your gut. You know when something in life doesn't feel right and isn't sitting right. And it can be overwhelming. So find help. I've benefited so much from therapy in my life, and any resource for therapy or counseling from a minister or a teacher. There's lots of information to read out there now, and there's lots of guides to help people navigate this, and there's a lot online. And so don't try and do it alone. Get support and get help, but trust yourself and believe in yourself. And if something doesn't ring true, trust your gut, not what you're being told. And never trust an agency. Never trust an organization over a person and over yourself. So.
Right. So, in what ways do you hope your memoir will resonate with readers who may have similar experiences?
I hope it will affirm that their experience is real and it's true, that they aren't alone, that this is normal for people in this situation. I hope it inspires them to keep searching or keep looking, and helps indicate the kinds of healing that can happen when you get all the pieces of information and when you can kind of cobble yourself together from all these various pieces of information. We as adoptees, even if you find your birth story, your family of origin, then you have to integrate the adopted you and the biological you, because you're not really fully either one. They're now two parts of you. Other people just have their selves, and now we have sort of two of us. We have to put that all together and integrate that. That's a whole nother step. I think that I hope to affirm for others, first of all and foremost. And then again, as I said, by the emotional experience of my writing, to try and let others feel that grief and loss so they could be more sensitive to the adoptee's journey and more open to learning about belonging and identity and why love is not enough and what we need to do going forward to support adoptees and their families. But primarily my interest is supporting adoptees.
Okay. Well, Janet, we have, wow, what a conversation. But we've reached the last of the questions. Do you have any parting words that you'd like to share with our audience? And be sure to include how they can get your book, Abandoned at Birth, and maybe contact you if they want to chat about it.
Thank you. My one advice would just be persistence and belief in yourself. Believe in yourself and never let anyone stop you from your journey. I can be found. I have a website, abandonedatbirthbook.com, or I'm on Instagram at Janet Sherlund Official. And you can buy my book on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, bookshop.org, anywhere where books are sold. And there is also an audiobook out there for people who like to listen as they're doing other things. Thank you for our conversation today and for your great questions and your interest in the subject. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Take care.